All language learning process is generally thought to be divided into these main activities: grammar, listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And while for many learners the latter seems to be quite a normal and fun activity, there are, however, other learners to whom the speaking part might look rather intimidating. They might prefer to spend their time doing writing or reading language learning activities, or even sometimes grammar seems to them like a real relaxing pastime compared to speaking. They just prefer more books to people most of the time. If you're one of them, or else you know somebody who matches the description, I'm inviting you to watch this video and have a talk about what it feels like to learn languages being an introvert. So right, today we're talking about language learning and introverts, the two things that very often people cannot even connect with one another. Seeing an introvert as somebody who's always sitting in the corner of the room, reading a book, trying to ignore everything and everybody around them. And the truth is, most of the time it is the reality. I think it's important we look at a somewhat official definition of who we're talking about. For example, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines an introvert as a typically reserved or quiet person who tends to be introspective and enjoys spending time alone. I don't know about you, but I definitely do feel that there's a certain tendency in society to portray introverts as boring nerds that have to go out there and socialize, that there's definitely something wrong with you if you don't want to do that. To me, it seems really abnormal and harmful. We're all different, and if you feel excellent communicating with 5-10 people at the same time and taking energy out of it, it doesn't mean that other people must feel the same way. There are actually people who only lose energy while being surrounded by 5-10 or more people, and for that reason might prefer a company of a book to a company of that group of people. And don't get me wrong, all of that doesn't mean that introverts hate spending time with any people, hate talking to people. No, it's just that they might be quite picky with who to let inside their circle, and that circle is usually very small. Introverts are said to be quiet people who find enjoyment in solitary activities rather than being in large groups of people. If that's about you, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing you should change about yourself if you don't feel like it. And secondly, welcome to the club. Let me tell you now that I personally have always been thinking of myself as an introvert, more likely since my childhood. A company of a good book very often seemed to me much better than a large group of people at a party. And well, being an introvert, I somehow managed to become fluent in English and later pick up several more languages to learn that I enjoy to this day. So I don't know if my example here will be enough for you, but I proved to myself, first of all, that being an introvert and learning languages is possible. There's actually can't be any problems at all unless you create them yourself in your head. And of course, to be completely honest with you, I sometimes have had and still do have a hard time trying to prove to myself that I am a normal person when I am in a situation in which I have to speak some language which is not my native one. Being surrounded by a large group of people is just, I find it really hard to concentrate when so many people looking at you and are waiting for you to say something. It's sometimes difficult for me personally to be in such a situation in my native language. How ironic. And to have that small talk or talk about nothing. So you can imagine how hard it might be for me sometimes when I am in those situations with non-native language. But I am not alone, right? For this period of time, the most difficult, let's put it so, language for me to deal with in those situations has been Spanish. Why? Well, as I explain it to myself, the language culture in general and Spanish native speakers are extremely open, and in the majority of the cases, again, in my personal experience, are rather extroverted. I guess if one day I begin to learn Italian, it will be even more difficult for me when it comes to speaking, since Italians are known to be even more outgoing and always wishing to talk, gesticulate, and just behave in a way in which an introvert can almost never be found. But now let's try to answer this question. Why does the topic of introverts and language learning, their struggle even to learn languages, even exist? Well, as you might have noticed, starting from the beginning of this video, we have been putting an emphasis on the speaking part. Speaking is an important part of both our life, our daily life in general, and our language study process. We're always and every day communicating with each other. And again, being an introvert, it doesn't mean you hate talking to people, does it? It only means that over communication, when it's just too much of different people surrounding you, puts an absolutely incredible amount of pressure on you and drains your energy out. That's why you consciously or unconsciously try to avoid it. By the way, doesn't even matter in what situation you're in, if you have to speak in your target language or else in your native one. And while being able to communicate in the language you're learning is definitely important, it's, on the other hand, totally fine not to think of the speaking part as something vital, simply because speaking does not play a vital role in your daily life in your native language. You do not need to pressure yourself to seek interactions with native speakers and talk to them. However, if you want to challenge yourself, that's another story, go for it. Who knows, it might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise, and it will help you to become more sociable, if that's something you want. But if you decide to go somewhere you don't want, to talk and meet people you don't want to meet, that's not necessary just because you don't do it in your native language, in your daily life. It's not something in your nature, let's put it so. And why do I even mention it? Just because, as I personally feel it, very often language learning is portrayed as a very fun activity enjoyed by many outgoing people at the same time, and it might be so, but not necessarily. Language learning might also look like this, and there's nothing wrong about it. Alright now, but what do we do then with the speaking part? Shall we just drop it? Well, of course not. Just as we don't drop speaking at all in our daily life with our native language. As I've mentioned earlier, we introverts love communicating with other people just like extroverts, but in a slightly different way and with much less people. Our comfort circle might consist of 2 or even 1 person, because that's enough. However, if you really feel the importance of speaking, of adding the speaking part into your language studying process to make your speaking skills better, I think nowadays there's no problem with that at all. There are so many websites absolutely for free, platforms, different apps where you can find somebody with whom you can practice speaking. Such free language exchange websites and platforms can even lead to finding a good friend or even your future life partner. That's, by the way, what happened to me. The next thing, and probably the most important of everything we've talked about in this video so far, let's try to answer this question, each of us for ourselves. For what? Why am I learning this exact language? Is it in order to be able to talk with natives? Or else I'm just seeking the ability to be able to read in the original? Actually, sometimes you might not even have a specific reason. There may sometimes be no why of why you're learning this specific language. You might be just interested in the culture or in the country, in history of that language, in its literature. And to give you my personal example, it's funny because I have a target language that fits into each category I've just mentioned. So Spanish, I have a very serious relationship with Spanish because I'm learning this language for family purposes. And how ironic, I have to be able to communicate in this language pretty well, no matter how difficult for me it might be sometimes. But I have to say I am learning and trying my best not to pressure myself. To be honest, the more I explore this topic, the more I understand how language learning is closely related to psychology in general. I know how hard it might be to speak in a foreign language, no matter how well you might know it. One thing that can help you is to probably start thinking less about what other people think about you, what they think about you, and also what they think about your ability to speak, to express your thoughts in a foreign language. When somebody or else a whole group of people is giving you a strange look while you're trying to figure out how to express yourself in the language that is not your native one, just try to pay less attention to them, or clearly tell them you're having a hard time trying to express yourself in their native language, and simply take a break. Nobody's gonna bite you for that. It's their problem if they do not understand how you might be struggling right now. Maybe it's just they have never learned themselves a foreign language in their life and have no idea. I know that one of the worst things that can happen to you in your language study process is when you're trying so hard to say something in that language, trying your best to collect your thoughts and opinions into a beautifully made sentence. And instead of seeing people you're talking to understand what you mean to say, you see a strange expression that appears on their faces. It's just so horrible. That's a horrible feeling. At this moment, all your confidence and self-esteem seems to just go away. The thing that helps you start speaking in your target language is not just a set of specific rules, but first of all is your own self-confidence and self-esteem that we have to work pretty hard on. The situation might actually be pretty much easier if you realize that you are learning this specific language just because of your pure interest in its culture, in its history, in its literature, as I've mentioned before. In my case, French, I'm learning this language mostly because I would like to read French literature in the original. That's my main goal. And Hindi, simply my pure interest in its history and culture. I love that, and I would love to be able to understand the language and read some of the main literary works one day. I know it's hard, and maybe I will never even achieve it, but I want to give it a go. I don't really care that much if one day I will be speaking these languages with natives or not. It's not the main goal for me at all. So I have decided for myself to take it very, very easy on the speaking part with these languages. Another essential thing that I would love to share with you that seems to me so powerful in the whole language learning process is writing. Seriously, if you're an introvert with passion, with love of writing, doesn't matter what, keeping diaries, keeping journals, commonplace books, you will have no problems. I really see writing as something that can develop our imagination, our vocabulary, and our speech, by the way, in both our native and target languages. As I've said many times and will be always repeating it, when your thoughts are well formed on paper, they will be well formed when you are trying to speak. Therefore, you might even feel a bit, at least a bit less pressured next time you find yourself in a group of people when you have to talk. You maybe will be talking with a bit less pressure, since some certain phrases or words or whole sentences might pop up in your head automatically. Your brain will help you remember them at the right time from the moment you were writing about something similar. This seriously helped me and still does help me to this day. Before we close up today's topic, let me give you just a bit more of inspiration and perhaps some self-esteem and self-confidence boosters. I am sure that language learning should be thought of as a very powerful activity for our brain on the one hand, and on the other as an engaging hobby. And in order to connect these two things and have the best of both worlds, you should learn languages the way you like. Speaking is not your priority and you just want to simply read books in the original, don't pay attention to people saying to you, for example, how come you say you speak fluently Spanish if you don't actually talk to anybody in Spanish? Then you're not fluent at it at all. Or else there might be people pushing you out of your introvert comfort zone, making you believe that you have to go against your will and talk and talk and talk to people, just because if you don't, you will never become fluent in this language. Will you believe me if I tell you that never have I ever spoken to any English native speakers? Just like having a normal conversation, not because I didn't want to though, it's just because I have never had such an opportunity yet. And without actually speaking in English with native speakers, I was able to reach a good level in the language. I encourage you to learn the languages you're interested in your own way, the way you like, and remember your goals and needs. Before filming this video, by the way, I, out of curiosity, searched here on YouTube this exact topic, and oh god, how surprised I was and how shocked, to be honest, I was to see so many language learners and polyglots talking about it. I swear I had no idea there are so many of us introverts out there who share love and passion for language learning, and we make it real. So if you ever feel weird, or if you think you're doing something wrong in your language study process, please don't think so. You're doing an amazing job and don't really need to prove your language skills to anybody. I know they're great. Well, it turned out to be a rather personal talk. Today I shared with you some of my own thoughts, with which of course you might not agree, and that's fine. However, if you found this video helpful in any way, I'll really appreciate your like to this video and maybe your comments down below. Tell me about your experience of learning languages as introverts. I would also appreciate if you decide to support Language Easy with a little donation if you'd like to see new videos more often. We'll be very happy to see you here again for another talk. See you.